All right, so the term hype job or overrated fighter, it's completely subjective in the sport of boxing, right? I mean, a lot of people think Canelo is overrated. A lot of people think Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. are overrated. And a lot of people even think, Floyd Mayweather is overrated, right? Now, do I agree with those statements? Well, I mean that's a different that's a topic for a different video, okay? But the point is, what I'm trying to say is that this term hype job and all that, it's subjective from the fans, right? I mean, people have their own idea of what a hype job is, right? However, I don't think I've seen a fighter that has been as overhyped as Tyson Fury, right? I personally believe that Tyson Fury is the most overrated fighter in boxing history, right? Not just in the heavyweight division, but just in boxing history in general, right? I mean, from what I've been hearing all these things like, Tyson Fury, he's, an unbeatable fighter. He's, no one can beat him, right? They're saying that, he's the best heavyweight of all time. And they're even comparing him to the likes of Muhammad Ali. And they, some have even, and I'm not kidding you, this, like, some have actually said that Tyson Fury would beat Muhammad Ali if they had a boxing match, right? So I'm basically gonna go through why I personally believe that why he's being overrated in this aspect, right? And why I don't believe that he's all this of, or he's all of what people are saying he is, right? But before I get into that, I just want to say I'm not saying Tyson Fury is a trash fighter or anything like that, right? Tyson Fury has shown that he is a decent fighter. I'm just saying for what people are saying about him, I personally think he's overrated in certain aspects, right? Which I'm going to get into. So that's just one thing I wanted to clear up. Another thing is that it seems like I go by this narrative that I only support Anthony Joshua in the heavyweight division, right? So that, I think AJ is the best boxer ever right now, and that I think all the other heavyweights, aren't as good as him. Basically, that I think, Anthony Joshua was the real champion of the division. Now, is there some truth to that? Well, yeah, maybe there is, but let's talk about that towards the end of the video, right? And let's talk about, or let me ask you guys a question, right? And I want you to answer this, honestly and truthfully. So here it is. So let's say in this, alternate circumstance, you have Anthony Joshua, whose fighting style consists of how he fought against Andy Ruiz Jr. in the second match, right? So basically fighting that style of just, running along the ropes, right? Trying to get a points decision victory. And whenever his opponents would get close, he would just clinch up straight away. Right? Let's say that's how he would fight in all of his fights. So let's say in the Dylan White fight, that's what he did. He would circle around the ropes, and whenever Dylan White would get close, he would just clinch up straight away. And say that he does that for like most of his fights, right? And he wins decision wins rather than getting the actual knockouts he gets, right? So I ask you this. Would you give him credit if he fought that kind of style in all of his fights? The answer is no. You would not be giving credit, right? A lot of people would be saying that, and I'm not saying like all you guys, but most of you guys would be saying that Anthony Joshua, he's too scared to get hit. He's glass Joe, he's glass jaw, right? And he's like he just runs along the ropes and then he just holds all the time. That's what most people would be saying. Now, let me ask you another question. So, let's say in this other circumstance, right? Um, AJ fights Ruiz, right? And let's say everything that happened in the first fight, in the actual fight, happens in this, alternate fight, right? So Ruiz, he knocks Joshua down a couple times, and he wobbles Joshua throughout the fight. And let's say that everything that happened in the actual fight happens in this fight, leading up until the 7th round. So let's say in the 7th round, what happens is Anthony Joshua, he holds Ruiz against the ropes, and basically what he does is he lifts Ruiz's head up with his left glove, and with his other glove, he comes over, boom, straight with a right hook on the jaw, and it knocks Ruiz down. The ref does the 10-8 count. Ruiz is unable to get up because he's discombobulated, and the ref waves it off as a knockout win for Anthony Joshua. So I ask you this. Would you give Anthony Joshua credit for getting the knockout in that way against Andy Ruiz Jr.? Once again, the answer is no. You would not be giving him credit, right? You, as well as all these other fans and all these other, boxing networks, they'd all be saying that Anthony Joshua is a disgusting fighter. He's a dirty fighter. He should never pick up a pair of gloves again. And, all these companies like DAZN, BT Sport, Top Rank, they'd all be making articles on, Anthony Joshua and why he's this, trash fighter and why he should be banned from the sport and all that, right? So why am I bringing this up? If this is a video about Tyson Fury, why am I bringing up this certain circumstance with Anthony Joshua fighting the style of, running and holding to get, a decision win in most of his fights? Well, the reason I'm bringing that up is because the way Anthony Joshua fights in the Andy Ruiz Jr. fight, the second one, is exactly how Tyson Fury fights in most of, if not all, of his fights, right? You go look at this guy's past fights, Tyson Fury, and he does nothing but just run and hold onto his opponents, right? So what he'll do is he'll run and he'll, stick the jab out and, throw these little tiny combinations at his opponents, right? To look to get a points decision, right? Without putting in a whole lot of effort. Or when his opponents do get close, all he does is just clinch up on them, right? I mean, we've seen it, right? Go look at the Deontay Wilder fight, the first one. Go look at the Klitschko fight. Go look at, any of this guy's fights, the Chisora fights, right? The Nikolai Further fights, And you'll see that this guy, all he does is run and hold, right? I mean, he doesn't want to get the knockout in these fights. He just wants to get a decision win, right? And, the reason I'm bringing that situation up with Anthony Joshua is because when Anthony Joshua fought that way against Ruiz, people were saying, oh, Joshua's scared to get hit, and, that's why he was just holding all the time onto Ruiz, right? Yet when Tyson Fury does it, no one says anything, right? So, I mean, fair enough if you're going to criticize AJ for that. Me personally, I didn't think that was the most dominant performance from AJ. However, I would say his boxing was good. The only thing I didn't like about that fight was the amount of holding Joshua did, right? But all I'm saying is that if you're going to criticize AJ for that, then show the same energy with Tyson Fury, is all I'm saying. So the way Anthony Joshua fought against Andy Ruiz Jr. in the second fight, and the way Tyson Fury fights in all of his fights, or if not most of his fights, I mean, they're basically the same fighter. There's only one difference between the two. And that is that Tyson Fury fights extremely dirty. Not just in a few or some of his fights, right? But in every single one of his fights. Go look at any of this guy's fights and you'll see how much dirty fighting he utilizes in his boxing. It's sickening, right? It's disgusting, right? Go look at the Wilder fights, where he's just rabbit punching Wilder the entire time. Go look at the Klitschko fight where he was just, he was hopping on Klitschko's back and just rabbit punching him the whole fight. You know what I mean? I mean, the Chisora fights where he's just leaning on Chisora, most of the time, right? You look at the Nevin Pajcik fight where he was picking up Pajcik and just throwing him on the ropes. And especially the Steve Cunningham fight, right? A fight he should have been disqualified in. You know what I mean? Where he just lifts Cunningham's head up into a punch. You know what I mean? I mean, let's just call it how it is. He should have been disqualified that fight, right? I mean, imagine if Cunningham did that to Fury, right? I mean, no one would be happy with it if, that happened, right? So, I mean, let's just be honest. Fury, he's overrated, right? And he's a dirty fighter. He fights extremely dirty. And that's, kind of the main reason he gets his knockout wins, right? This guy has, he doesn't hit hard for a heavyweight. So he makes up for it in just, utilizing all this dirty fighting, right? I mean, this guy will rabbit punch you, he'll headlock you, he'll excessively clinch you, all right? He'll hit you in the balls, he'll, elbow you, he'll do all these things to get an advantage over you, right? Whether it's legal or not. And it just baffles me how this guy, he gets away with so much of it in his fights. You know what I mean? And these same people, right? These same toxic fans, and I'm not saying all Fury fans are toxic, right? I'm just saying, some of them are. And these same fans that, complain about, Floyd Mayweather, Andre Ward, um, Jeff Horn, all these other fighters, Bernard Hopkins, how they'll complain about those fighters, fighting in a dirty manner, yet they're completely okay with Tyson Fury doing it, right? I mean, it's just, let's call it how it is. Fury's, the reason he gets these wins is because of the way he fights, right? He fights very tactically, so he'll either, just look to get a points decision just by running the entire time, not really engaging, you know what I mean? And then, just holding on to his opponents whenever he is in trouble, right? And if he does want to get a knockout, he'll do it illegally, right? Like, he'll just hit you behind the head, or he'll, do all these things like, elbow you, right? Or just, hold your head into a punch, right? And yeah, so I mean, listen, I'm just pointing out these things that no one else is really pointing out, right? Um, yeah, I mean, listen, if people talk about the Wilder fight, how he was able to stop Wilder. I mean, we'll get into that fight later, but I mean, did he really do it in a clean fashion? Like, did he really? Because that's not the fight I saw. You know what I mean? And the same thing goes with his other fights, right? Um. So yeah, I don't know. Just these same people that will, people. I mean, these toxic fans, right? The toxic ones, not just the casual fans or whatever, but the ones that just make stuff up. I mean, they'll attack another fighter or whatnot, right? For fighting dirty or fighting tactically. They'll attack Anthony Joshua for fighting that specific way against Ruiz Jr., right? And they'll basically say, "Oh, but Joshua was running, so he's not a good fighter," right? But when Tyson Fury does it, I mean, people say, "Oh, but he's the better boxer out of him and his opponent," right? So that means he's one of the greatest heavyweights ever, right? So basically, I mean, what happens is people, they'll switch a narrative, any time to the point where it's suitable to them in a certain circumstance, right? So, for example, if Fury's fighting, then yeah, it's okay to fight that way. But if someone like Joshua or I don't know, even Klitschko, I mean, that's what they were saying about Klitschko, right? How he was just holding and running, right? When it's, when it's those guys fighting, they'll say it's like the worst way to fight ever or whatever. So yeah, like I said, I mean, these are just things I'm pointing out, right? Because, no one else is pointing them out, right? And he's getting overhyped in this aspect,